story now. Senate seat for sale. The political world is in shock over one of the most blatant alleged acts of corruption in U.S. history.
Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich is free on his own recognizance after being arrested yesterday. Federal investigators say the second-term Democrat was caught on wiretap, scheming to sell Barack Obama's vacant Senate seat for cash, or maybe a plum job for himself in the new administration.
While prosecutors say Barack Obama had nothing to do with it and most likely didn't even know about it, he and every other public figure is keeping as much distance as possible from the man now forever linked to scandal.
This is a sad day for government. It's a very sad day for Illinois government. Governor Blagojevich has taken us to a truly new low.
That new low, according to this complaint, includes accusations that Blagojevich was putting up for auction to the highest bidder the U.S. Senate seat vacated by Barack Obama. According to prosecutor Patrick Fitzgerald, the bugged conversation of the governor's phone calls was the most appalling.
The conduct would make Lincoln roll over in his grave. The governor's own words describing the Senate seat, quote, "It's a bleeping valuable thing, you just don't give it away for nothing."
How much? The complaint says $500,000 to $1 million. One of the supposed bidders would be someone favorable to a powerful Illinois labor union. The pay-to-play scheme, as prosecutors allege, also included trying to get Chicago Tribune journalists critical of the governor fired in exchange for state help in selling the Tribune's Wrigley Field ballpark. In another alleged scheme, $8 million in state help for a children's hospital was being held up in exchange for a political contribution. In October, Fitzgerald placed court-approved wiretaps on the governor's home phone and in his political office, as well as his conference room. On Monday, Blagojevich addressed the media that had reported last week the feds had wiretapped him.
If anybody wants to tape my conversations, go right ahead. Feel free to do it.
Yesterday, appearing before a federal magistrate, the governor, dressed in a jogging suit, said nothing as a federal magistrate released him on a low bond and made him surrender his passport. The feds knocked on Blagojevich's door at 6 a.m. to arrest him. The governor reportedly asked if it was a joke. But prosecutor Patrick Fitzgerald says what the governor said in his own words, now allegedly caught on tape, is nothing to laugh at.
The most appalling conduct Governor Blagojevich engaged in, according to the complaint filed today or unsealed today, is that he attempted to sell the Senate seat. The Senate seat he had the sole right under Illinois to appoint to replace President-elect Obama.
Now, President-elect Obama says he's had no contact with Blagojevich, but just 2 weeks ago, his top aide, David Axelrod, told Fox News Chicago that Obama had talked to the governor about a successor. Transition officials are now saying Axelrod misspoke. Washington Republicans say the serious nature of the charges raises questions about the interaction between Blagojevich, Obama, and people who will be working for the future president. Well, for more on this investigation itself and where it goes from here, we turn to a former chief assistant U.S. attorney. Curtis Fallgatter spent 17 years with that office before becoming one of the most highly regarded criminal defense lawyers here in the area. And you also tried a number of public official bribery cases here in Jacksonville when Jacksonville was in the midst of its own public corruption scandal in the 80s. Good morning to you, Curtis.
Good morning, Stacey. Good to see you.
When you've got the affidavit here,
yes.
How many pages is it?
76-page affidavit.
Is that long?
Very long. Typically 5 to 10 pages would be typical, but a lot of detail in here. 2-month wiretap of his offices at the campaign headquarters and his private home.
Talk to me about the wiretaps and how prosecutors had to go through the process to get those.
They went to chief judges, had to get approval from the courts, approval from the Attorney General of the United States to make application, and they have to provide probable cause. That'll be a key area for the defense, of course, to try to challenge to determine whether they had probable cause to even get the wiretap.
In other words, a judge had to hear the evidence and say, okay, I grant you the right to plant these wiretaps.
Preliminary evidence. They didn't get the wiretap evidence, but there was some evidence that led to the wiretap, had to establish probable cause. Perhaps it did. Perhaps not. That'll be a hot topic for debate. Okay, so why do you think prosecutors went public at this particular point? Do you think they're worried about their wiretaps? Do you think they wanted to kind of bait it out there and see if there were other people involved? Yeah, I think those are the two reasons. They want the public to know it's a high-profile case, as obviously you're aware of. Terrible situation with the imminency of an appointment that needs to be put out there so action can be taken, such as impeachment. And the third goal of law enforcement is this goes back to 2002, 6 years of alleged corruption. They're going to be looking for people that will come forward and say, I was extorted by this governor. here's some bad things he did to me, so they can build their case perhaps even stronger.
In the past 35 years, 3 Illinois governors have gone to prison, and now there's the possibility of a 4th. Because of your experience in what happened here in Jacksonville, give us some insight into maybe endemic corruption in a system. I mean, can one person stop it?
Normally, when law enforcement comes in and goes public and public corruption cases come out, it usually educates the public officials, hopefully creates deterrent.
You know, people are going to hear you say, educate public officials. Do they need to be educated on not to be corrupt?
The key is deterrence. You know, if law enforcement's out there and they're effective and they're putting a stop to public corruption, typically public officials will not want to engage in corruption. Obviously, that's not the case up there. Here's a governor that ran on a campaign of law and order and clearing out the corruption of the prior administration.
Sure.
He did just the opposite.
Sure.
Sold his office.
Okay, so let's talk about the timeline here. Going to trial. I mean, this is going to be drawn out with defense attorneys making motions. The timeline for the trial and what the sentencing guidelines are if these 2 are found guilty.
Typically 70 days from indictment. They're not going to a grand jury yet. They did this complaint. It's an affidavit by the FBI. They'll go in front of a grand jury, return an indictment. They may supersede it several times depending on what evidence comes in. But once the indictment's there, normally 70 days to trial. Case of this magnitude, they'll get extended probably for months. Sentencing guidelines under this bribery statute, probably in the range of 10 to 15 years, assuming the about $1 million or so in fraud that they claim here can be proven.
In 30 seconds, how do you defend this case?
Well, you challenge the wiretap. Hope that there's some loopholes there, because that's the key evidence of the case. If you can't get that suppressed, you're going to look at the words. They've alleged a conspiracy. Is this just the governor and his chief of staff talking about speculation, or was this really a conspiracy by them to attempt to sell their office, or is it just more idle chat? I hear from the reports the governor's going to say this was really just kind of loose talk. It wasn't really a criminal conspiracy. Tough sell, particularly given the words that were captured, and it's his words. But that would be one challenge to the legal sufficiency.
Right. Curtis Fallgatter joining us live this morning, former U.S. Assistant Chief Prosecutor for the U.S. Attorney's Office, and Rod Blagojevich. Governor Blagojevich at this particular point does not have any plans to resign, but as you can imagine, many people in Illinois are calling for that resignation. Thank you, Curtis.
You're welcome.
Let's turn it over to Bruce now for the other story topping national